Sam Darnold has had back-to-back magical seasons. Who could be the next Sam Darnold in the NFL? We'll debate next.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us the #1 sports podcast network. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is the Fantasy Football Hall of Famer, Michael Fabiano. And it's a Wednesday show, so of course, former NFL scout Matt Williamson is here. And on today's show, we're going to talk about some dynasty secrets to help you win your championships. We're going to talk about George Pickens' dynasty value. But Matt, I want to start with this.
All right.
Sam Darnold is the ultimate reclamation project in the NFL. He bounced around the league on multiple teams. He went to Minnesota. He had a monster season. He goes to Seattle. He wins a Super Bowl. I've got to assume there's a lot of NFL owners and GMs that are looking at this Darnold situation thinking, okay, who could be that next guy that we steal that was a high draft pick or that was, buried on a team's bench for the last couple of years that we can turn into a Super Bowl champion? Who do you think is out there that could do that, and how could that help us in fantasy?
Well, I think it's definitely going to be a theme of football, NFL, and then into fantasy as well, in that I've been saying the older and older I get, when I look at these prospects where they land, quarterbacks, I almost don't care who the player is and what my evaluation of them are. It's just if they go to the Jets, they're doomed, like Fabs mentioned almost every week. If Darnold would have landed with the Chiefs, maybe he'd have been fine from the beginning. You know what I mean? So super talented, high pedigree guys that go to terrible situations, terrible organizations that get bounced because it fails, because everybody fails there, I think are going to be very much in the eye of smart teams. Daniel Jones doesn't count anymore, right? I mean, he's past that. He was last.
I think he's made the leap, right? I think what we saw from this year with the Colts, I think he's officially back to being somebody that should be
Daniel
a starter.
Jones was this year's Sam Darnold.
Yeah, he had this conversation a year ago. He would count. I think
100%.
He doesn't count anymore. I think we probably have the same names because I think this year's crop of these dudes are thinner than usual. I don't know if Willis counts, but I'm extremely interested in Willis. I've never been a Kyler fan, but he was in in a Jets-like organization for his whole career. And if he lands somewhere stable, I bet he gets better than what he did in Arizona. Mac Jones is somebody that my man Brian Peacock talks to no end and really thinks he's one of the best 20-ish quarterbacks in the league. Brian hosts Locked On Niners. I'm not as fond of it, but he also doesn't run for our reasons. But I bet he could be had. And then here's a real crazy one, and I'm not backing this guy at all. But in Superflex, what about Anthony Richardson? I mean, I don't know if he can see. I don't know if he can stay healthy. But I know he can run, and I know he was a top 5 pick. What if he ends up in Philadelphia for a year or something, and McKee gets moved? Or McKee's another one, too, by the way.
Fabs, what about for you? Is there a name out there that you think could be the next one to make this kind of leap?
So I'm trying to fit into your narrative here about Super Bowl, right? So fantasy doesn't really matter.
Okay, or I mean, just making a team a contender again, right?
Okay, but because Sam Darnold was not a good fantasy quarterback this season, I actually went back and looked. You guys probably won't even believe this, but Sam Darnold this past season averaged the same amount of fantasy points as he did ballpark in his first 2 years with the Jets.
Wow.
So he was not good. In fact, in his second year with the Jets, he averaged more points than he did this past year with the Seahawks. So let's get off the Sam Darnold's a good fantasy quarterback unless he's in Minnesota narrative, because he's not a good one.
Well, hold on, Fabs, real quick.
Yeah.
You're right. I don't think none of us believe that Sam Darnold's a top 12 fantasy quarterback or top 15 fantasy quarterback. He's usable in super flex leagues, but for our purposes, he was good enough and competent enough to help JSN become the number 2 receiver.
Well, yeah, sure.
Football. And that's really what we're talking about, because we watch football every Sunday and there's awful quarterback situations, and we love guys at receiver that just never get the ball because their quarterbacks are awful. So that's more
okay.
what we're talking about here.
So is Jacoby Brissett a better quarterback in that respect than Sam Darnold because he awoke in Michael Wilson and was way better than Darnold from a statistical perspective?
The problem with Brissett is I don't see him being somebody that's viewed as a long-term starter, right?
No, I get. I'm kind of just having fun with you.
I know.
Because I don't like Darnold in fantasy outside of last season. But some of the quarterbacks that Matt mentioned, it's so funny because I'm going to be doing, and I've started to do my Fabs 5 sleepers for each position over at Sports Illustrated, and we're going to talk about those players on the podcast as well. But Anthony Richardson was one of them. I can't see why the Colts would keep him when they want Daniel Jones so badly. They have Riley Leonard behind him. They trade Richardson. Maybe he goes, I don't know. Cardinals could use a quarterback, right? If they don't bring back that. There are no shortage of teams out there that could use Richardson and a guy who can run with the football. Again, as Matt said, we're in simpatico here. We'll always have some intrigue from a fantasy perspective. But the player that I thought of, and we talked about this before, was Mac Jones. And I know there's reports out there that the Niners don't want to get rid of Mac Jones in case Brock Purdy gets hurt. But you guys seem to think that may be blowing smoke up our patooties and that they may actually want to trade or would be open to trading Mac Jones. So if Mac Jones goes someplace where he can be the starter, then I really think that's the guy that I would target. I don't think Kyler Murray is a Super Bowl quarterback no matter where he plays. I don't think Tua Tagovailoa is a Super Bowl quarterback. I don't think Malik Willis is a Super Bowl quarterback. I kind of feel like Mac Jones could be a Super Bowl quarterback if he fits in the right offense, much like Darnold did in Seattle, where he wasn't statistically great, but he did enough to get them to where they needed to be.
I think all of us are in agreement. Like Mac Jones on the right team can be competent enough to get the ball to the playmakers. And we saw it this year with San Fran. Like that team was falling apart around Mac Jones, and he had them competitive every single week. Now, is he going to go somewhere where he's got a coach as good as Kyle Shanahan? Probably not. But
he was pretty good with the Jags too, though.
Yeah,
he wasn't bad.
He wasn't bad.
He wasn't bad with the Jag. Funny story though here, real quick, because Marcus, he always has to keep me on the rails, and sometimes I go off of them. Several years ago, I went out and did an appearance for a company, and I was with Ricky Waters. We were in Silicon Valley, somewhere in the Bay Area, and Marcus always says San Fran. I said San Fran in front of people who root for the 49ers, and I got booed. They hate that. They hate San Fran more than anything else. I'm just throwing it out there.
Okay.
You said it, and it just reminded me of that story.
The last quarterback, and Matt, you actually mentioned him, is Kyler Murray. And we all have our issues with Kyler Murray as a quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's just not that many guys that have like multiple 25-plus touchdown passing seasons who are as athletic as he is. And honestly, the completion percentage is pretty good. You look at some of the offensive coordinators that he's had over his career. He had Cliff Kingsbury for a big chunk of that. Cliff Kingsbury couldn't even get another offensive coordinator job this year. I'm just wondering if one of these smart teams is going to buy low on Kyler, not thinking he's going to be a top 10 quarterback, but thinking he could be like the 14th or 15th best quarterback. And if you put him, and again, I know Minnesota's our default situation for all these, but if Kyler Murray's in Minnesota, Matt, they won 9 games this year with how awful McCarthy, Brosmer, and Wentz are. I know Kyler's better than all those guys. I just won't be surprised if he lands in a good situation, and we're all wondering, how did we miss on Kyler again?
I don't know if we're talking about trying to take a team to the Super Bowl or if we're talking about fantasy, but we're a fantasy show. And if Kyler ends up in Minnesota, I'm not a big fan of his at all, but boy, he's going to be on a lot of my fantasy teams for redraft. Times
100%.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Well, can I give you another one? I mean, again, we talk about Cleveland, and that's a rough situation. But I actually think Kyler and Todd Monken would fit really well together because Todd Monken wants to push the ball down the field, and Kyler's actually
good. They got Deshaun Watson there, buddy. What are you talking about?
Oh my gosh,
they're all set.
I do think Todd Monken would be a really good fit with Kyler. Now, can Cleveland take on his contract?
Kyler would be great in Minnesota. That's where, if I had a wish list of quarterbacks and where they would land from a fantasy standpoint, Matt nails it. Minnesota would be great. There's speculation about the Jets. Obviously, quarterbacks go to die in New York. You don't want them to go there.
Yeah. I mean, I know I'm a Steelers guy, but I think you got to throw that out there too. I mean, if Mac or Kyler ended up in Pittsburgh, it's not as good as Minnesota, but it's okay if they draft a receiver in the first round, or
And honestly, I think Mac Jones would be a better fit with McCarthy and what he wants to do. Now, are you going to win a Super Bowl? Probably not. But man, I don't think Mac Jones could be the
Super Bowl. But
yeah, I think Mac Jones could be the best quarterback they've had since 2018. Ben,
yeah, right.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about a former Steeler as we're talking about Big Ben. George Pickens, who is expected to be franchise tagged by the Dallas Cowboys next week. We've also heard some trade rumblings. Is now the time to sell George Pickens? We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your job post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. If I ever needed to hire someone for this show, I would go straight to Indeed and be very specific about what I needed, which is real experience and not just some resume buzzwords. So spend more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. And listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to give your job the premium placement that it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. If you haven't done so already, go check out the new Everydayer Club. You're going to get ad-free episodes to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast for just $5 a month. Go to lockedondynasty.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. All right, Matt, let's talk about our guy, George Pickens, former Pittsburgh Steeler, current Dallas Cowboy. We talked about him a lot in this podcast. He had an awesome year. He was a second-team All-Pro, and his current dynasty value is wide receiver 13 over on Dynasty League Football. He's only 24. Is now the time to get out, or are you buying even more of Pickens?
Well, question to you first as the Locked On Cowboy host. You assume he'll get franchised and they'll try to work out a long-term deal?
Yes, I think the Cowboys are very, very interested in trying to get him locked to a long-term deal. However, we heard some reports that the Cowboys wouldn't be opposed to trading him. I think that's only if they get a first-round pick and they're able to draft someone to replace him. I don't think they're looking to trade him for a third-round pick or anything like that.
Okay, so he's in the news now. If I owned him, and I do in a league or two, I think I would put him alone on the trade block just for the whole league to see what flies I attract. I would like to move him now. I don't have to move him now. I don't want to be like, boy, he's got to go. But I do have some Steeler bias, and I've been in that facility when he's there, and I don't 100% trust the person or the personality, especially with a huge contract coming and a little lack of incentive in terms of, having to give it his all. If I could flip him I pulled up a couple names, McConkey, Burden, Olave, and a pick, sign me up.
Fabs, how do you feel?
If you're not trading, you're not trying. I think it's a good idea to put him on the trade block. And, I pulled some stats because, you have to look at the entirety of the season, but you have to look at it based on who was available and who wasn't. So for the season, Pickens scored nearly 292 fantasy points. He averaged over 17 points per game. In the 13 games that he played with CeeDee Lamb, he averaged 15 points per game. So keep that in mind. And then you look at the 4 games that he played without CeeDee Lamb, and I'm going to include the week 3 game because CeeDee only played 7 snaps before he got hurt. Pickens averaged over 24 points per game. So he saw a drop of 9 points per game when Lamb was playing as opposed to when Lamb was not playing. And then if you exclude week 18 because neither played very much because the Cowboys didn't have anything to play for, then Pickens averaged 16 points per game. which is very good. And when you look at that projected over a full season, that still would give Pickens a wide receiver 7 finish. And that's phenomenal. But unless CeeDee gets hurt again next season, Pickens is going to regress. I mean, I just don't think there's any question about that. And so what I like is I would argue right now that his value is never going to get higher because he's coming off of a top 5 finish with almost 300 fantasy points and a season where he played without CeeDee 4 times. And then again, you exclude week 18 because they didn't really care about that game. And then you also think about, okay, so if he stays in Dallas, he's a 15 point per game player, which is good. Mm-hmm. But you're going to be trying to sell him as a wide receiver 1 who put up elite type numbers last year. And then if he doesn't end up staying in Dallas long-term, where would he go that he would continue to be that valuable? So I don't know that there's many places. So that's why if I could trade him now and get value for him, like good, strong value, like Matt mentioned, I would not be opposed to it whatsoever.
Do you guys also agree that Flournoy and Ferguson aren't going away, that they're going to be factors?
Sure.
Yeah. I think they're going to be small factors here. Yes.
Okay.
Here's the only counter argument that I would make. I mean, I generally agree with both of you guys, but this was his first year in a new offense, and a Brian Schottenheimer offense is fairly complicated, and I think it was more complicated than what he was running in Pittsburgh. And he still went out and put up some big numbers. It took him a couple of weeks to get started. And then, I mean, once CeeDee got hurt, he really took off. But I also think he was more comfortable in this offense. And I do wonder, like, if the Cowboys are investing a significant amount of money in him, let's say it's $35 million a year for the next 4 years, they're going to want to make sure they get the most bang for their buck. And Matt, the other part of it is I love CeeDee Lamb, one of my favorite players in the league. Mm-hmm. But Pickens is 3 years younger. Is there going to be a point where their talents just kind of cross and Pickens ends up becoming the number 1 receiver on this offense and CeeDee goes down to being more of the possession guy? I mean, you and I have talked about Pickens before. You were out in Latrobe watching him practice, and he's just a different dude in some of the things he can do. Is there any chance that, yes, we might be at the ceiling, but he's able to kind of maintain it a little bit in this new offense?
I think there's a more than a 0% chance that he's the best receiver in the league. Yeah. I mean, he's unbelievable to watch. I mean, he reminded me when I met Larry Fitzgerald for the first time at Pitt campus, like, whoa, he's different than everybody. I just worry about keeping his head on straight. And
that's always the big concern. But I do wonder, like, he's very close with CeeDee Lamb. He's very close with Dak Prescott. He's only 24. And again, you can't always assume that these players are going to mature as they get older. But I think all 3 of us here would admit, like, we're just different people at 21 compared to being when we were 26, 27, right?
And it sure seems like he's getting better mentoring than he did in Pittsburgh, too. And definitely a better offensive scheme, too.
I also think, too, you have to, again, look at the numbers that I threw out there. And I also want to note that 51% of his points came in 5 games. And he also scored fewer than 13 points 8 times. Now, we'll take away week 18 because they didn't care, so 7 times. So, yes, the numbers at the end of the year look great. Breaking them all down, not as great. Still good, not as great. CeeDee Lamb, when he played, George Pickens was a good wide receiver, but he was not elite. And he was not consistent either. Like, when 50% of your games come in 5 of your points come in 5 games, that's very heavily weighted.
I think he'll always be that way because he's such a big play guy.
Probably.
So that's why, like, if my wide receiver 1 isn't giving me, 18 a game, then is he really a wide receiver 1?
Well, the good thing is he's not necessarily being valued as that, but I do want to ask you about some receivers that are being drafted ahead of him and how you guys would feel. So, Matt, George Pickens or Emeka Egbuka in Dynasty?
Pickens still. Egbuka scares me a little bit. That's just such a crowded receiver room. Maybe they move on from Godwin and maybe Evans doesn't come back, but he really calmed down as the season went on.
Fabs?
Pickens in Dallas, though.
Okay, Pickens in Dallas. Rashee Rice, who is currently wide receiver 11.
I probably trust Pickens off the field more than Rice.
Terrifying to think about, but I agree with you, Fabs.
Rashee Rice looks like, just a long-term suspension waiting to happen. If he was not a knucklehead off the field, I'd pick him, but he scares me.
Yeah.
Nico Collins, wide receiver 10.
Nico.
And I'm with you. Nico's a little bit older, but I think he's a lot safer. So I think if you're looking at value, you can argue anywhere between wide receiver 11 and wide receiver 16 for Pickens. I don't think it hurts to throw him out in your dynasty, league, see what somebody will offer you. Maybe there's somebody that's way higher on Pickens than you are, and you'll get 120 cents on the dollar. All right, let's talk about some dynasty secrets. How do you get over the hump and win a championship? We'll tell you next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The winter games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for the events that you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years, and that's why following the winter games on FanDuel just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sports that you care about the most, FanDuel gives you the most ways to stay connected to the action. The drama of the curling matches has been unbelievable the last couple of days. I love watching the hockey games. I mean, we just get some unbelievable matches so far. FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. And even some of the events that are pretty obscure become must watch when you're fully locked into the competition. The winter games are on, and there is no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Matt, we have a question here from Jake, who said he just started playing Dynasty football about 7 years ago. He's been in the championship game twice, but he can't get over the hump. He wants to know, what are your guys' secrets to finally winning a championship?
If he's in the hunt, he's doing 99% of the work correctly. I mean, he must be a quality owner. If he's getting down to the nitty gritty and getting into the playoffs year after year, I'll be honest, I've probably mentioned this on the show. Like my home league with my high school buddies, redraft that we just party it up, and everyone has one of those. I love how we divvy out the funds because the point leader is the guy that gets the most chiclets. And to me, that's really the best owner of the year, not who won the Super Bowl. So I advocate for being leagues to be heavier in rewarding final points than Super Bowl wins. I'm not saying they shouldn't get anything for winning the Super Bowl, but there's so much luck involved. Your kicker misses one kick, but you were by far the best team, or whatever.
Well, that's why you get rid of kickers and dynasty.
Well, that too.
Yeah.
No, you mean like Jason Myers, who could have been the MVP of the Super Bowl? Oh,
exactly why you don't need kickers.
Who scored more points than anybody this past season? Oh, I forgot. Okay.
Don't even get Fab started.
Oh, I know.
Fabs, what do you think? How do you get over the hump?
I'm on board with Matt. If you're getting there to the finals, I mean, at that point, you're dealing with, kind of luck of the draw. I guess some of the other things that you can look at is your opponent's quarterback and maybe one of your wide receivers who you may or may not want to start on the same team. Are you playing the matchups from the defensive side correctly? That kind of thing. And also keep in mind that when you get down to like the end of the season, sometimes you got to think outside of the box. And I'm not saying that, you sit any studs because you clearly don't want to do that. But sometimes you thinking outside of the box helps you a little bit. There were so many wild things that happened, this past season, and it continues to get wilder and wilder every single year, that sometimes something that looks so obvious to you just looking at it on the surface might not be. So again, keeping tabs on what your teammate or your opponent has in terms of their teams and who they're starting, and then thinking somewhat outside of the box when you're setting your lineup.
Yeah, maybe you could do a better job of streaming a defense or something like that. If that's something you're thinking about, you find a really good matchup for your Super Bowl or playoff run or something like that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Look ahead. Like always, like when I'm in my playoffs and I feel like my team is good enough to go to the championship, if I have a player who has no value to me whatsoever on my bench in the previous week, like in the week that I'm playing, and then I look ahead and see, well, wow, that defense is available and they're playing that offense next week. Well, if I win this week, I want that defense. So I'm going to go out and pick up that defense now and stash them. And then if I win and I get to, say, the championship rounds, I've got a phenomenal defensive matchup that I can throw out there, assuming I don't have, an elite type of defensive unit. You got to look ahead too.
I think the other part of it is it takes a lot of skill to build a dynasty contender, right? Especially if you've got a really active league, but it also takes a lot of luck to win a championship. And we see this every year. Like the guys that are winning championships, like some of the players on these rosters, it's mind boggling some of the times of the situations they get into. And, you got guys that are, being rested for the playoffs, or they're sitting out because their team's not very good. Like if you had Brock Bowers this year, you didn't even get to use him in the championship game because the Raiders decided to shut him down, right? That's nothing that you can control. So again, if you're hanging around the rim, you're in the playoffs every year, you're in the Final Four. It's just, again, it's a lot of luck. Eventually it'll even out. I wouldn't stress about it too much.
Yeah, you're doing the hard stuff, it sounds like, you know?
Exactly. Unfortunately, in fantasy football, you can't play defense. So luck is going to rear its ugly head from time to time. And, you just got to hope that that Lady Luck is shining on you and not on your opponent.
All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Make sure you subscribe and follow the podcast so you get all of the latest episodes. And if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Dynasty ad-free, plus members-only Discord access, and so much more. Head over to lockedondynasty.supercast.com to join the club. And for those of you on video, we can send you the first ever 24/7 national NBA YouTube channel. And on audio, make your second listen the Locked On NFL podcast. Follow Matt on Twitter at Williamson NFL. Follow Fabs at Michael _Fabiano. I'm at Marcus _Mosher. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.